"If you play that violin like a maestra, I'll give you my inheritance," Elliot said mockingly, and laughter echoed through the hall. The humiliation was instantaneous, until silence fell like a thunderbolt. Elliot Grayson. The name still inspired reverence and fear in Charleston. Owner of a real estate empire that crisscrossed the southern states like a web of gold and concrete, Elliot was known as much for his business savvy as for his inability to get along with anyone. Widowed for over 30 years, childless, Elliot spent his days in his imposing mansion on the South Battery, directly overlooking White Point Garden and the waterfront of Charleston Harbor. An 81-year-old man who seemed to have made a pact with time. His body was wrinkled and stooped, but his eyes, those blue eyes, remained sharp, suspicious, arrogant. Every day, religiously, he read the Charleston Gazette on the upstairs balcony while sipping his black Darjeeling tea. He was served by a mute butler and surrounded by silence. He couldn't stand voices, only his own. Employees. They exchanged them like napkins. "I can't stand incompetence," he said, "and poor people usually have that as their surname." He once fired a cook because the risotto had a pinch of nutmeg added to it. "If I wanted cheap spices, I would have gone to eat at the port with the dock workers," he muttered, in front of all the guests. He was cruel, but also magnetic, and everyone around him, even his distant relatives, orbited around him as if seeking warmth from a fireplace that only knew how to burn. Harper Collins, 26 years old. A simple name that hid a complex soul. Far away lived Harper Collins, 26 years old. A simple name that hid a complex soul. She lived in a small studio apartment in North Charleston, near the border with Hanahan. The peeling walls, empty refrigerator, and overdue rent left no room for dreams. But she had one: music. At age 9, she received an old violin from the Calhoun Street Baptist Church. At 13, she played alone on weekends in Marion Square, and when no one was looking, she sat in the back of the public library studying forgotten sheet music. Harper wasn't just good, she was brilliant, but life didn't want to know about shine. Her mother, who always encouraged her, died of cancer when Harper was 14. Her father disappeared months later. Without family, support, or money, she'd been a cleaning lady, a nanny, a cupcake seller, and a caregiver for the elderly. But now, with bills piling up and no other options in sight, she'd accepted a new job, even though she knew no one would last more than 2 weeks there. "Old Grayson will break you," her friend Carla warned. "That man is sick," Harper simply replied. "If he tries, he'll find someone who's been broken and put back together 1,000 times. Besides, I'll have a little room in your mansion, and I won't have to pay rent." On the first day, she walked in silently. Her hair was tied in a simple bun. She wore faded jeans, old sneakers, and a battered backpack with a music notebook hidden among the cleaning cloths. She cleaned meticulously. She arrived before sunrise and left only when the neighborhood clock tower struck 8 o'clock. Elliot pretended not to see her, but he watched. "You clean like you're polishing a Stradivarius." "Funny," she didn't answer. "Do you have a name, girl, or should I call you Mop?" "Harper, sir. Harper Collins. Name of a failed writer. Fits." She took a deep breath. He smiled, pleased with the teasing. "Well, we'll see how long it lasts." Grayson Manor was a fortress of marble and dark wood, with tall windows and stained glass windows that cast colors onto the floor as if trying to distract from the chill that exuded from the space. The chandeliers, inherited from Europe, weighed tons, and the 18th century paintings seemed to regard visitors judgmentally. Each room had a different echo. Each closed door held a secret. In the library, dozens of framed sheet music filled one wall. Elliot had been a music lover, until he realized no one played for him, only for his fortune. It was there that Harper, while cleaning a crooked picture frame, commented softly, "Bach, Sonata No. 1 in G minor." Elliot turned around, surprised. "Do you know how to read sheet music?" "Yes, sir, but she's a cleaning lady. They are not mutually exclusive things." He laughed scornfully, saying, "Of course they are." The days passed. and it was becoming more and more unbearable for Harper to endure old Elliot's mockery, but she remained steadfast in her mission. One cloudy morning, the bells of St. Michael's Church echoed like ghostly whispers through the still empty streets of the South Battery. In the master's suite, on the top floor of Grayson Manor, Elliot Grayson awoke with a searing pain shooting through his legs. A searing iron seared through his fragile bones, searing away what dignity remained in his 81-year-old body. He tried to sit up, failed. He tried to call the butler, but pride made him wait. He stood there, motionless, staring at the carved ceiling with its gilded moldings. Hours passed. The black tea sat cold on the tray. The newspapers remained unopened. And for the first time in decades, Elliot didn't read the Charleston Gazette. The silence he had always loved now seemed to mock him. With his forehead sweating, his eyes half closed, and the crumpled sheet clutched between his fingers, Elliot felt, for the first time in a long time, a truth no one dared tell him. He was dying. That's it. So that's it, he whispered with a trembling voice, looking at the shadow that the mirror projected on the wall. He knew death had begun to pull his chair away. His fingers, once steady enough to sign million-dollar contracts, now trembled. His memory stumbled over the names of nephews, cousins, and old business associates. And what ate at him most was the empty echo of the house, that mansion that once pulsated with dinners, fake laughter, and expensive music, now offered only shuffling footsteps and doors that creaked with oblivion. That morning, Elliot realized he couldn't take anything with him, but he still had one last thing to give: his inheritance. If we are to die, let them all die together with the hope of inheriting something, he murmured, smiling mockingly, leaning against the carved wooden headboard. He summoned the butler with a sharp snap of his fingers. Even without speaking, the elderly assistant understood Elliot's every command as an extension of his soul. Organize a party, a gala, one that makes the windows rattle. The butler blinked doubtfully. Invite everyone, my relatives, friends, enemies, even that idiot from Arizona. What's his name? Michael, Manson, Marshall, whatever. Let everyone come. Elliot slowly turned the wedding ring he still wore from his deceased wife. I'm going to announce my heir, and I want them to see me. I want to see their faces. A bunch of vultures in ties, drooling over what's mine. Oh, and don't forget, I want an orchestra of violinists because it's going to be a big night. Hire the best in town. And so it was done. Gold invitations were urgently printed at a boutique print shop in the historic center. Envelopes sealed with red wax clearly stated, attendance required, gala evening, Grayson Manor, important announcement. The Boston Symphony Orchestra was hired. They were the best musicians in the country. In North Charleston, while collecting bottles from the garden floor, Harper saw one of the invitations on the entryway table, among newly arrived white flowers. She didn't dare ask, but inside, something told him that a special event was going to happen, and at the top of the mansion, amid velvet cushions and linen sheets, Elliot Grayson stared into the void with the eyes of someone who no longer feared death. He feared oblivion. The days passed, and the big day arrived. It was a humid night in Charleston, and the Grayson mansion, imposing on the South Battery, looked like a lit-up castle about to host a royal trial. Harper was assigned to serve the guests. Her black uniform was neatly pressed, her hair tightly tied back, and in her eyes, the weight of a woman who didn't belong in that world, but knew how to move through it with dignity. Luxury cars began to park in rows along the street. Limousines, Jaguars, shiny BMWs. Outside, it was a social event. Inside, a theater of hypocrisy. Did you see who arrived? It's Elliot's great-nephew, the one who never calls, but came running because of the will. That one over there, second cousin of the late wife, came from California with her gold-digging resume in her pocket. In the dining room, the Baroque paintings and crystal chandeliers reflected an almost supernatural glow. Champagnes bubbled. Caviar was served with mother-of-pearl spoons. The orchestra's music began to fill the room with class and arrogance. And there, in the center of the makeshift throne, stood Elliot Grayson, with his impeccable dark blue suit, silver cane, and a sneer on his lips. "Look at that. Everyone here for me. What a miracle," he said aloud, raising his glass. "Some came for the memories, others for my soul, but most, for the bank account, of course." The guests laughed, but the tension was there. Everyone knew the night would be decisive. Harper walked among them like a ghost with silver trays. One guest even snapped his fingers at her, as if summoning a waiter. She just took a deep breath and continued. Suddenly, the music stopped. One of the violinists, sweating and pale-faced, dropped his instrument. "Oh my God, he's having an allergic reaction," the conductor shouted. "He ate shrimp. Someone call an ambulance." Within seconds, the tension turned to chaos. The musician was carried out. The ambulance arrived, and the hall fell into an uncomfortable silence. The orchestra was incomplete. The music had died. Elliot frowned in irritation. "Tuss, how wonderful! I pay a fortune to hear Mozart, and the idiot decides to die in the middle of the play." Some laughed, others were embarrassed. It was then that Harper, standing discreetly near the stage, approached the conductor. "Sir, if you need, I can help. I can play the violin." The conductor stared at her in surprise. Before he could respond, Elliot heard. The silence shattered like glass. The old man struggled to his feet, looked around and shouted for the whole hall to hear, "You, the cleaning lady?" The conversation ceased. Everyone turned to look. "You want to play at my party now? Is that it? Going from the mop to the stage? How about this then?" He walked to the center of the room, raised his cane in the air like a scepter, and shot back with contempt. "If you play this violin like a maestra, I'll give you my inheritance." A cruel laugh erupted from the guests. Others laughed just to please. The echo of the phrase spread through the hall like wildfire. Harper stood still. Her cheeks flushed. Her hands trembled. "Come on," Elliot insisted theatrically. "Show off your talent, broom prodigy! Or did you just want a minute of fame before going back to cleaning toilets?" "Elliot," one of the aunts murmured, embarrassed. But he ignored it. He loved public humiliation. It was his favorite sport. Harper took a deep breath, and with a firm voice, even with tears in her eyes, she replied, "Very well, Mr. Grayson. Then let the concert begin." The hall fell silent. The conductor, disconcerted, handed the violin to the young woman. The lights in the hall seemed to have gone out, even though they hadn't actually been turned off, and fate, finally, tuned its strings. The entire hall held its breath. Harper, violin in hand, walked slowly to the center of the small platform where the musicians stood. Each step echoed against the marble. Each look was a blade stuck in his back. The instrument felt heavy, not just because of the material, but because of what it now represented, a burden or a chance. Elliot, leaning back in his high-backed chair, crossed his legs arrogantly, twirling his cane between his fingers as if he were watching a circus show. "Come on, Harper. Impress us, or amuse us." His voice cut through the air like a whip. The guests murmured, "Is she really going to play? It's a joke, right? I can't believe the old man is doing this." Harper adjusted his shoulder, positioned the violin under his chin, and held the bow gently. His hands were still shaking. Silence. Total. Not the clink of a glass, not a whisper. In the audience, Aunt Meredith, the only one with a truly worried look, held her wineglass without realizing she was tilting it, almost spilling the liquid. The conductor, from the corner of the stage, watched with half-closed eyes. The butler, motionless against the wall, seemed to be holding his breath. Harper closed her eyes for a moment, and in that second, she went back in time. At 9 years old, under the tree in the churchyard, at 13 in Marion Square, with coins at her feet and a shy smile on her face. At 17, alone in the cold studio with the muffled sound of the world. And now, there, in front of a room that wanted to see her fall, she opened her eyes. Elliot grumbled. "It's already out of tune before it starts." Harper brought his bow to the first string. But before playing, he took a deep breath and said, without taking his eyes off the void, "Music is in my blood, and I'm going to prove it." The sentence reverberated like muffled thunder. And then she played the first note. Harper's bow glided across the string for the first time. The sound that echoed wasn't just music, it was memory. It was pain. It was resistance. The first note came out low, timid but firm, like a candle lit in a dark room. For a brief moment, the hall grew even quieter, as if even hearts hesitated to beat so as not to disturb. Elliot, who held his cane like a scepter, froze. His blue eyes, usually so cold and mocking, flickered. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Harper followed. The piece she'd chosen wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to impress. It was a simple, intimate adaptation of the sonata. No, one in G minor, the same one she'd mentioned weeks earlier while cleaning a crooked picture frame in the library. But in her hands, in her soul, it became a prayer, a cry for help, and an affirmation of strength, a silent scream, coming from a girl whom life tried to bury, but who learned to flourish in the darkness. The faces in the room began to transform. Aunt Meredith clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. The hired maestro, who had previously regarded her with skepticism, now watched with absolute respect. Elliot's arrogant nephew, who thought the whole thing was a joke, lowered his head in embarrassment. Even the waiters stopped. Even the wind from Charleston Harbor outside seemed to have ceased to listen, and in the center of it all, Harper played, with eyes closed, as if dancing with ghosts, with steady hands, as if holding destiny itself. And at the final moment of the piece, a gentle passage reminiscent of the rocking of a lullaby, she took a deep breath and finished. Silence. Again, for 2 eternal seconds, no one moved. And then, applause, timid at first, but they soon spread like wildfire, intense, long, uncontrollable. The audience rose to their feet. People wept. Others just shook their heads in disbelief at what they had witnessed. Harper, motionless, the violin still resting against her neck, slowly opened her eyes. They were wet, but her posture was firm. Elliot remained seated. He didn't applaud. He just stared, until he muttered softly to himself, "Impossible." Harper stepped off the stage with dignity. She didn't smile. She didn't say thank you. She just walked back to the corner where the dirty dishes, bucket, and rags were, as if everything that had just happened was just another break between cleaning. But the hall was no longer the same, until suddenly something unusual happened. "Enough," Elliot said, his voice low but as firm as choked thunder. Nobody understood. "The party is over." Expressions of confusion spread like a virus. "But Mr. Grayson," one of the nephews murmured, confused. "What about the inheritance announcement?" Elliot whipped around, his eyes blazing. "Do you think you deserve something from me?" The hall froze. They came here like hyenas waiting for a corpse. Some of them didn't even know the way to my door, but as soon as they smelled money, oh, then they showed up. He looked at one of the aunts with a sarcastic smile. "You, Meredith, when my wife died, you disappeared. You didn't make a single phone call. But here you are, with your fake pearl necklace and your hunger for fortune." Her eyes widened, offended. "And you, Henry," he pointed to one of his cousins, "who keeps saying you'll run my business better. You couldn't even run a lemonade stand." The guests were petrified. Some tried to leave discreetly, others just kept their heads down. But Elliot continued, now turning to the orchestra. "And you, an entire orchestra hired for a fortune, and all it took was one violinist sneezing for everything to fall apart. You know what amazes me?" He paused dramatically. "That a cleaning lady outdid them." The gaze fell on Harper like a blade. She didn't move. "Yes, you," he said. "You humiliated me. You made me look like an idiot in front of everyone." "I just touched it," Harper replied calmly. "You gave me permission." "Permission? I made a joke, a mockery. You were supposed to stay in your place and accept it, like everyone here does. The anger in his voice wasn't just against her. It was against life, against everything he had built. But no, you thought you could shine. You thought you could be extraordinary. You, with your dirty rags and your smelly backpack. The words were spat out like venom. Harper, however, didn't look away. Even wounded, she remained firm. Elliot then turned to everyone once more and shouted, "Go away, everyone!" The hall began to empty quickly. The laughter had died away. All that remained were lowered glances and hurried footsteps. The orchestra dismantled its instruments, the guests picked up their coats and jewelry, and the waiters dispersed like ants under hot water. When the hall was practically empty, Elliot looked at Harper again and said with contempt, "Since you're so special, stay. Enjoy the party, but not to touch, to clean every corner, every plate, every footprint of those worms that passed through here." He threw his cane to the ground and walked slowly away towards the oak staircase, muttering something no one could understand. Harper, alone, stood for a moment in the center of the room. The chandeliers still shone. Champagne glasses still clinked on the tables, but everything seemed empty. She took a deep breath, and then she began to clean. The young woman, her sleeves rolled up and her knees on the floor, slowly scrubbed a wine stain from the burgundy carpet. Her forehead was sweating, her hands were shaking, but not from physical exertion. It was the heart, still pulsing to the rhythm of the humiliation he had suffered. In that same room where everyone laughed, where she dared to dream, even if only for a moment, of something bigger than cleaning. She sat on the floor for a second. She took a deep breath, and then his eyes fell on the violin, left in a corner of the stage, forgotten like a broken piece. She approached. She ran her fingers slowly over the instrument's varnished body. A tear ran silently down her cheek until it touched her chin. Her thoughts dragged her back to the past. She was only 9 years old when she got her first violin. It was old, cracked, with worn strings and the smell of old wood. It was a gift from the pastor of the little Calhoun Street Baptist Church, where his mother sang on Sundays. "For Harper," he said, handing her the case gently, "because angels also play with their hands." That was the first time she felt she had a gift, the first time music made her feel special. Rehearsals were held in the church basement, dimly lit. His mother sat nearby, smiling, applauding every off-key note as if it were a Mozart symphony, until the accident happened. A car, a wet curve, a truck. Harper was 14 years old. She lost both her parents in the blink of an eye. The music conservatory she'd dreamed of. It never happened. She'd been accepted with a partial scholarship, but couldn't cover the remaining costs. She worked in the morning, studied at night. She tried, she struggled, but life quickly swallowed up those who had no one. Cleaning, jobs, silences, and the violin kept in a box under the bed, as if it were a piece of another universe, of another Harper who only existed in the intervals of exhaustion. Back to the present, Harper now sat on the stage step. The room was still dark. Only a yellowish corner lamp illuminated her tired face. She hugged the violin to her chest, and he murmured, "Music was all I had left, and I let the world push it into a corner." Silence. But today, for a moment, I remembered who I was. And as much as she had been humiliated, she felt something different inside her. It wasn't anger, nor sadness. It was a spark, as if the past had whispered back, "You're still here." She looked toward the staircase Elliot had climbed. She felt no hatred. I felt sorry. She then sat in the center of the room, cross-legged, and placed the violin on her shoulder, as if embracing something sacred. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and played. The first note was timid, the second firm. In the third, the salon ceased to exist. She played with her soul, not to impress, not to be seen. She played because it was the only place her heart knew how to live. Upstairs, Elliot, lying in his recliner, woke up, not with a start, But as if someone had opened the window to his soul, the music echoed through the halls like a childhood whisper. He stood up, irritably. What is this now? He picked up his cane and went downstairs, grumbling with each step. But when he reached the second floor and looked between the columns overlooking the hall, he stopped. The young woman below, sitting on the floor, her head slightly tilted and her eyes closed, seemed to levitate with each note. The violin cried and smiled, all at the same time. Elliot pressed his hand against the railing. He felt something rise in his chest, a strange pressure, an almost sweet pain. Memories of the wife, of the piano on their wedding anniversary, of the forgotten childhood, of the boy who dreamed of composing before becoming steel. He stood there, in silence. The face was still hard, but the eyes were slowly breaking. Anger, pride, shame, charm, all mixed together. And when Harper finished, with a soft glide of the bow and a sigh at the end, Elliot murmured to himself, "Damn girl, why the hell do you have to play like that?" But he couldn't get out of there. He stood motionless, fascinated, like someone watching something die and be reborn at the same time. The old man returned to bed, and Harper then continued with her cleaning. Night fell. The next morning dawned grey in Charleston, with a light mist covering the gardens of Grayson Manor. The sun still struggled to break through the clouds, as if it too were tired from the night before. Harper stood in the kitchen, alone. Her dirty uniform from the night before had already been changed into a new one, but the exhaustion, it still clung to her shoulders. She washed the dishes with automatic movements, listening to the tinkle of raindrops on the stained glass window. She was exhausted, but something in her chest vibrated, as if every note she'd played on stage still echoed within her. That's when James, the mute butler, entered discreetly. In his hands, he carried an envelope with Elliot Grayson's gold seal. Harper dried his hands and, with a suspicious look, opened the paper. Inside was a note, a few words. "Miss Collins, report to the main hall at 10 p.m. CG." Her heart raced. She glanced at the wall clock, 8 minutes to go. When she entered the great hall, already clean and quiet, Harper did not expect to find what she saw. All of Elliot's paintings of important figures were facing the wall. In the center, on a table covered in red cloth, sat a brand new violin case with a silver bow. Beside it, a small card, "So you never have to play with rusty strings again." Harper's eyes widened in confusion. "I don't understand." That's when Elliot appeared at the top of the stairs, leaning on his carved wooden cane. "Don't get too excited. I'm not adopting you or apologizing to you," he said, his voice hoarse and dry. I can't stand to see talent wasted." Harper was silent, but her eyes said it all. Elliot walked slowly down the steps. He stopped in front of her. "Last night, you reminded me of music, when it was about feeling, not about looking important." He looked away, almost embarrassed. "I don't know what will become of my inheritance. I don't even know if I care. But you made me feel something I haven't felt in decades." She tried to speak, but he held up his hand. "Shh, don't mess it up. This is already too mushy." They stared at each other for a moment. For the first time, there was no war in Elliot's eyes, just humanity. In the days that followed, Harper stopped being the cleaning lady and became Harper. James began letting her use the antique violin in the music room after work. And one Tuesday morning, Elliot came into the room and listened to her play in silence for 20 minutes. At afternoon coffee, Elliot commented, as if he didn't care, "That part in G major was a little out of tune." Harper smiled. "I'll work on it." The old man then invited her to sit beside him and tell her story, how she had learned to play so beautifully. Harper then began to tell her life story to Elliot. The man was fascinated. And before the young woman finished, and unexpectedly a tear fell from the resentful old man's eyes. "I'm so sorry about your family, girl, but I'm glad our paths crossed." The new day dawned with the stained glass windows of Grayson Manor painting the floor with colors that seemed more vivid than ever. But what Harper didn't know is that behind those thick walls, a silent war was beginning to brew. That morning, Elliot didn't show up for tea as usual. Holed up in his upstairs office, he read and reread the clauses of his old will, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose and his eyes half closed. The sound of the violin from the previous night still echoed in his mind like a sweet curse. Then, for the first time in years, he called his personal lawyer, Frederick Lanes, a grey-haired, dry-spoken gentleman with a tight tie. "Fred, I'm considering changing some things in the will. May I ask the reason for this sudden inclination?" "Mr. Grayson." Elliot didn't answer. He just said, "I want to include someone and cut out some parasites." Fred's eyes widened. He swallowed hard. "Mr. Grayson, this could generate family opposition. Wouldn't it be more prudent to wait a little longer? You know, are vulnerable, Fred. I'm Elliot Grayson. I'm more alive now than I have been in the last 10 years. But like every new breeze, the news leaked out. The next afternoon, Eloise, his second niece, one of the first to arrive for the inheritance event, overheard part of the conversation as she passed the half-open office door. Shocked, she quickly shared it with her other relatives, who were still staying at the mansion, awaiting the big announcement. The tea room became an informal courtroom of whispers, sarcasm, and spewed venom. "The old man has gone mad. He's going to leave everything to a cleaning lady. She must have bewitched him. Could it be that they are having an affair? Where did she come from? Nobody knows this girl. Someone needs to fix this." The next morning, one of the family lawyers, an ambitious great-nephew named Clive Beaumont, sought out Elliot in the conservatory. "Uncle Elliot, with all due respect, there are rumors circulating about you changing your will." Elliot looked up from his newspaper. "And since when is that your problem?" "Well, we're family, and family has the right to know if some scam is being planned." "Coup? This young woman, Harper, no one knows where she came from. She didn't even finish school, and now she's playing the violin around the house like a star. It's strange. She seems like a freeloader." Elliot slowly folded the newspaper. "You called me an old fool between the lines, Clive. That's all I understood." "No, Uncle, of course not. I just think that if there's a change in the will, the family won't accept it idly. I've already consulted my lawyers." "Great. Then hire the best. You'll need it." Harper began to notice the hostile climate. Doors closed as she approached. Guests whispered and laughed at the sight of her. Some stared at her as if she were a thief in disguise. An anonymous note appeared in his makeshift locker. "Be careful with dreams. They can turn into nightmares very quickly." She was silent, but inside, the old fear returned. Late the next night, Harper met Elliot in the lounge. He was on his back, looking out to sea through the huge windows. She came closer. "Mr. Grayson, am I disturbing you?" He took a while to answer. "You played that violin as if the whole house were underwater and your music were air. It bothers me, but in a way I never knew I needed." She looked down. "People are saying things, horrible things, about me. They always will. It's not about what they say. It's about what you believe yourself to be." Harper swallowed hard. "And you, sir, do you believe me?" Elliot turned around, his eyes wet and his voice trembling. "More than all the blood heirs who have surrounded me all these years." Silence. But it was a different silence. Warm, confused, painful, because they both knew the war was just beginning. From that day on, everything began to change. Elliot made some phone calls. A lot. He contacted former music colleagues, conservatory professors, and retired conductors. He sent a personal email to Margaret Tills, director of the prestigious Charleston School of Music, asking them to evaluate Harper. "She plays as if she was born with the strings in her veins," he wrote. On the same day, Margaret replied, "If she is half as good as you say, it is our duty to listen to her." The following week, Harper had an informal audition at school. She walked in nervous, her hands sweating, and the violin she'd received from church when she was 9, the varnish still peeling. She sat down, took a deep breath, and played Thais' meditation. When it was over, no one said anything for 10 seconds, until Margaret simply said, "We have a full scholarship for you, and it will be our honor." With Elliot's help, Harper now divided her time between work and classes. She began earning a little extra, not out of pity, but out of merit. A small private room on the back floor of the mansion was prepared for her to rest, with a new mirror, a nightstand, and for the first time in years, a bookshelf all her own. She cried with joy all night when she saw it, but unfortunately, not everything was rosy. On the other side of the city, the calm was seen as a threat. Clive Beaumont, Elliot's nephew, contacted his namesake, Clive Prescott, the Grayson family's trusted lawyer for over 30 years, who was furious to learn that Elliot intended to alter the will. "He's senile, or being manipulated." "By whom?" asked a distant cousin. "By that young woman, the cleaning lady." Clive Prescott was not only influential but also corrupt. He used his connections to spread rumors, and the rumors soon turned into accusations. "I heard the girl is drugging Mr. Grayson to sign documents. She has access to his room. She's bewitching the old man with that violin." Pressure mounted when Clive secured, with the help of a corrupt judge and a witness doctor, a court order to investigate Harper for undue influence, emotional manipulation, and possible poisoning for financial gain. The news broke in the local press. "Young maid accused of doping millionaire in Charleston. Will under suspicion, scam or love of art?" Harper was in shock. The morning the officers arrived at the mansion with the document in hand, she was shaking from head to toe. That's absurd. I would never. You must appear in court within 10 days to answer the charges." Elliot was present. He tried to get up from the armchair, with difficulty. "Get your hands off her. That girl is more honest than all my relatives combined." "Mr. Grayson," said the officer, "this measure is for your protection." Elliot took a deep breath. He was pale, tired, but his eyes still gleamed with fury. That same afternoon, he called Evan Reyes, the idealistic young lawyer who had helped him before. "I need you. Now it's war." Evan didn't come alone. He brought a whole team of legal experts, including a property law specialist and a former district attorney. They formed a veritable defense team for Harper, who now needed to prove to the world that she wasn't a manipulator, but rather a wounded woman trying to find her feet. Evan reassured her, looking into her eyes. "You won't go through this alone. We will clear your name. And if it's up to me, this city will give you a standing ovation once again." Harper, with tears in her eyes, simply replied, "This time I will fight." Meanwhile, the city was divided. Some said Harper was a con artist. Others said she was simply a victim of the greed of the wealthy. And at the center of it all, Elliot, tired, sick, but increasingly certain that this young woman gave him back something that not even money could buy, a sense of purpose to continue living. The court set the trial for a week later. Now, everything was at stake, and in the blink of an eye, the big day arrived. Elliot was not present because of his health. The courtroom is packed, the press is present, and Clive, the family's corrupt lawyer, arrives confidently, flanked by his influential allies. But Harper isn't alone. The benches were full. Relatives of the Graysons, reporters, curious onlookers, and even musicians from the orchestra hired for the previous party filled the courtroom. The cold lights of the courtroom didn't hide the judgmental gazes that fell on Harper. She sat next to Evan, breathing deeply to control the trembling in her hands. She wore simple clothing, her hair tied back, her face bare. She wore no makeup, just dignity. The judge, Bradley Monroe, a gray-haired man with a stern countenance, began, "We are gathered to judge the case of Mrs. Harper Collins, accused of willful manipulation with the intention of unduly obtaining an inheritance." The sound of Vanessa Grayson, S. Heels, Elliot's ambitious niece, echoed as she stood up. "Your Excellency, with all due respect, this young woman is deceiving an 81-year-old man. My uncle has always been strict. strong. And now, under the influence of this con artist, he wants to change his entire will. Other relatives nodded in support, until Clive Prescott, the family lawyer, stood up. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, this young woman has stealthily infiltrated Mr. Grayson's life, posing as a humble cleaning lady, but using her beauty and supposed talent to seduce him in a moment of vulnerability. I have reports from staff members who have seen her administering medication, and there are signs of changes in Mr. Grayson's behavior since her arrival. That's a lie! Harper shouted, standing up. I never did anything like that. Silence! Ordered the judge. Harper's attorney, Evan Reyes, stood up. Your Excellency, if I may, I would like to call a witness before the court continues to be used as a platform for fiction. The doors opened. Elliot Grayson entered. The entire room rose in shock. He was pale, walking with difficulty, leaning on a cane and a nurse's arm, but his expression was steely. Judge Bradley Monroe asked, Mr. Grayson, are you willing to testify? I am, Your Excellency. I am much more lucid than all these hypocrites put together. He walked to the center of the room. The silence was absolute. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, he said, his voice hoarse. And then he looked at Harper. This young woman saved my life, not with medicine, not with lies, but with music. With courage, with her soul. Clive interrupted. Mr. Grayson, with all due respect, Mrs. Harper could be taking advantage of your advanced age. Age hasn't robbed me of my sanity, Clive. It's only robbed me of my patience with parasites like you. Murmurs filled the room until Vanessa interrupted. But uncle, you're confused. You're being influenced. Shut up, Vanessa. Elliot took a deep breath, staring at the judge. If my desire to change my will bothers me so much, perhaps it's because for the first time in years, someone deserved what I built, not with flattery, not with promises, but with respect. She listened to me when no one else would. Evan then presented videos and messages of praise Harper had received from former bosses, teachers, and even orchestra members who witnessed her performance at the party. One of the witnesses, the orchestra conductor, stood up. Your Excellency, I heard it with my own ears. She plays like few others. She's a natural talent. We were impressed. I even suggested she join our group as a permanent violinist. After hours of clashing, the judge asked for silence. He paused for a long, thoughtful moment. He looked at Harper. He looked at Clive. And finally he said, This court finds that there is no consistent evidence of bad faith on the part of Ms. Harper Collins. On the contrary, the testimony and evidence point to a rare case of someone who broke the cycle of invisibility with dignity. The case is closed. You are free of all charges. Harper didn't believe it. She looked at Elliot, who was smiling for the first time without sarcasm. Now you believe that you have value, he whispered as he approached. She cried. For the first time in a long time, not from pain, but from relief. And the room burst into applause. 6 months later, the sun was beginning to rise over Charleston Harbor, tinging the waters with golden hues, as if the sky were writing a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Harper Collins wasn't waking up to clean someone else's mansion. She was waking up in her own home, a small townhouse in Mount Pleasant, modest but bright. The porch had flower pots, and inside, the walls were decorated with sheet music, photographs, and books. On the table, a violin rested in its open case, the same one Elliot had given her after the trial. Beside it, a handwritten letter, on old paper, with firm handwriting. Harper, I never had any heirs, but inheritance isn't just blood. It's what we leave in the world when it's no longer ours. You changed the music of my existence. Now, let the world hear yours. Elliot Grayson. He had passed away a few weeks after the trial, quietly, as he had always lived, but different from before, in peace. Harper didn't just inherit the money, she inherited the emotional legacy of someone who, late in life, finally understood what it meant to love and be loved. With part of her inheritance, Harper created the Invisible Notes Project, an NGO focused on musically talented, low-income children. Within a few months, dozens of young musicians were receiving free lessons with donated instruments. At the inauguration, a local journalist interviewed her. "Harper, did you ever imagine your life would change so much?" She smiled, a tired but full smile. "No, but I never stopped dreaming. I just put the dream to sleep for a while." The violin now sounded every afternoon in her house, and sometimes, when she played a particularly difficult piece, she would stop for a second, look up at the sky, and say softly, "This one's for you, grumpy old man." At the city hospital, a new music auditorium was opened in honor of Elliot Grayson. A plaque above the entrance read, "Sometimes what saves a soul is listening to it." End of story.